We can't afford to be ignorant about China. In other words, it's one of the very few cases where you have a huge power, second biggest economy in the world, second biggest military in the world, where we have to work out, first of all, how to protect our national resources, for instance, the theft of intellectual property in scientific areas, which we don't want disappearing out the, out the door in a USB stick. That's perfectly fair to have security measures that act against that.
Are you surprised that China, on, relatively early on in this leadership contest, is as high on the agenda as this?
I'm not surprised, because China actually has been a subject of some inquiry within the Conservative Party for the last 2 or 3 years, particularly since the pandemic. What I am unsurprised by, but a bit unimpressed by, is that the proposals that have been put forward actually don't seem very thought through. The statements from the Rishi Sunak side suggest that the idea is to abolish these Confucius Institutes, language training centers, which are sponsored by the Chinese government. And you can quite see why they would want to do that in terms of the connection with a foreign power that they don't trust. But what hasn't been put in there is any acknowledgement that this country, the UK, desperately needs more people who read and understand Chinese to deal with every issue from national security to trade. And if these institutes are basically abolished overnight, the question of where millions of pounds are going to come from, presumably the education budget, to replace this funding at very short notice, hasn't been addressed at all. And on the other side, you have Liz Truss, who, under the Foreign Office, has recently, at least it's been reported in The Spectator and elsewhere, maybe abolishing the Great Britain China Centre, which is one of the few politically neutral, non-Chinese connected, UK connected centres that actually does low-key research and liaison on China to keep the public and private sphere informed. So all in all, there's a much more complex debate about how we inform ourselves about China, but this leadership debate doesn't seem to be it.
No, it's about trying to show who can be toughest. But on that point of these Confucius Institutes, surely maybe we should be saying China's a massively important country, perhaps the most powerful country of the next 50 years. We should be learning Mandarin. We should be learning about Chinese politics and customs. We should have a very clear pillar of our education system that deals with that. But that pillar should not be supported by Chinese money, because Chinese money always comes with conditions attached.
Absolutely a valid point, Stig, in which case, of course, the second part of the sentence, which I'm sure you were just about to say, is that presumably British taxpayers are going to have to pay for it. In other words, there's a huge amount of pressure on British universities to provide these kind of services, like teaching Mandarin, a national security and trade, hugely sensitive language in that sense. And the universities are not teaming up with Confucius Institutes because they've suddenly developed some great enthusiasm for the People's Republic of China. They've done it because there isn't enough money in the system for an expensive, intensive and highly technical set of language training programs. So basically, what we're coming back to is we desperately need this expertise in Mandarin across the country and much more of it, particularly if China, as Rishi Sunak says, is going to be this major obstacle in terms of national progress. Well, fine. But then the question comes up, who's going to pay for it?
Well, indeed. And can we afford to be tough on China? It's all very well making these claims in a mudslinging before the leadership election, but at some point we have to have some sort of economic relationship with China. One of the major countries in the world for the next decades to come. George Osborne and David Cameron were famously soft on China. They wanted Chinese money to pour in. Is there a version of events, Rana, where we have to have some sort of economic relationship with China, and how broad and extensive could that be?
It's very simple, actually, Stake, in one sense, although it has to be implemented. We can't afford to be ignorant about China. In other words, it's one of the very few cases where you have a huge power, second biggest economy in the world, second biggest military in the world, where we have to work out, first of all, how to protect our national resources, for instance, the theft of intellectual property in scientific areas, which we don't want disappearing out the, out the door in a USB stick. That's perfectly fair to have security measures that act against that. But you also have to acknowledge that after Brexit, global Britain says that it wants to engage with the most dynamic economic area in the world. That's the Asia Pacific region. Well, the headline is that every single country, every single one in the Asia Pacific region has China as its number one trading partner. So if we want to get into that space, and we should, then we're going to have to work out how we talk to China as well, at the same time as not letting our intellectual property get stolen. We have to be able to do both at once. To do that, we need language training. We need knowledge and understanding of what China's system is and how it works. And none of that comes if we basically abolish the relatively few areas that we have in the UK that actually do specialist training on that.
And just finally, Rana, you're professor of modern the history and politics of modern China at Oxford. Have you ever felt pressured by the Chinese state in doing what you're doing?
No, I'm glad to say that personally, I never have done it. And those who know my writings, I hope in press, both in the UK, and indeed sometimes actually writing for Chinese media as well, where I make it very clear that values like the liberal freedoms of academia in the UK are non-negotiable, are things I'm very happy to say and will continue to say to our to the Chinese public sphere as well. So I hope that continues.